A judge sentences an innocent black teen to life in prison, without hesitation, without mercy. But from his cold prison cell, the boy makes one desperate phone call, and everything changes, because the person who picks up is his estranged father, the U.S. Attorney General. What happens next will shake the justice system to its core. How did the judge cover up the truth? And just how far will a powerful father go to save the son he abandoned? This is a story of injustice, redemption, and the painful fight to right a system that never cared. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Malik Henderson made his way through the crowded hallway of Lincoln High School. His worn leather sketchbook was tucked safely under his arm, pressed against his navy blue hoodie like a shield. Around him, students rushed past in their usual Wednesday morning chaos, laughing, shoving, racing to beat the bell. Malik moved quietly through the noise, his eyes taking in everything. That's what artists did after all. They watched, they noticed. The way Sarah Chen's ponytail bounced as she hurried to AP Chemistry. How Marcus Williams slumped against his locker, probably having stayed up too late gaming again. The subtle shift in Mr. Peterson's walk. His knee must be bothering him today. All these details would find their way into his sketchbook eventually. That's where Malik's voice truly came alive, in the soft scratch of pencil against paper. "Morning, Malik," Mrs. Rodriguez called out as he passed the English department office. Her smile was warm and genuine, like always. He nodded back with a small smile. "Morning, Mrs. R, double quote." That's all he needed to say. The teachers understood him. The quiet one. The observer. The kid whose art spoke volumes while his mouth stayed mostly shut. His last report card had been straight A's, and his art portfolio was growing stronger by the day. Just last week, Mrs. Rodriguez had helped him polish his essay for the Arts Future Scholarship. The morning passed in its usual rhythm of classes, note-taking, and stolen moments of sketching in the margins of his notebooks. During lunch, Malik found his usual spot in the corner of the cafeteria. As he ate his sandwich, his pencil moved across the pages of his sketchbook, capturing the scene before him, the chaotic energy of hundreds of teenagers sharing space and stories. When the final bell rang, Malik headed straight for the public library 6 blocks away. The scholarship application needed high-quality scans of his artwork, and the library had the best scanner in the neighborhood. The afternoon sun was warm on his face as he walked, and the spring breeze rustled through the newly budding trees. Miss Gloria, the elderly librarian with silver-rimmed glasses, gave him a friendly wave as he entered. "Back again, Malik? Those art schools won't know what hit them when they see your work." He ducked his head, pleased but embarrassed by the praise. "Thanks, Miss Gloria." The scanner was free, so Malik got straight to work. Each piece needed to be perfect. The portrait of his mother reading by lamplight, the detailed street scene from his bedroom window, the abstract piece about hope and struggle that had won first place in the school art show. The soft whir of the scanner provided a soothing backdrop as he worked methodically through his portfolio. An hour later, with the scans safely stored on his flash drive, Malik packed up his sketchbook and headed home. His stomach growled, reminding him that lunch had been hours ago. The corner store was only a block out of his way, and he had enough allowance left for some snacks. The bell above the door chimed as he entered Martinez's market. Mr. Martinez was behind the counter as usual, watching a small TV mounted in the corner. Malik grabbed a bag of chips and a chocolate bar, then added a small container of strawberries, his mom's favorite. "That'll be $6.75, Mr. Martinez said, ringing up the items. Malik had just stepped out of the store, plastic bag in one hand and sketchbook in the other, when he heard the screech of tires. 2 police cruisers pulled up to the curb, their lights off but their presence overwhelming. Everything happened so fast. "On the ground, now," a voice shouted. Before Malik could process what was happening, hands grabbed him from behind. His snacks scattered across the sidewalk as he was slammed face first onto the concrete. His chest hit the ground hard enough to knock the wind out of him. "I said don't move." The voice was angry now, though Malik hadn't been moving at all. Cold metal closed around his wrists with a decisive click. The handcuffs bit into his skin as rough hands patted him down. Malik's heart hammered against the pavement, his mind spinning with confusion and fear. "We got a call about an armed robbery at the GameStop on 47th, one officer said to another. Suspect matches the description, young black male, blue hoodie. Malik wanted to speak up, to explain that he'd been at the library all afternoon, that Miss Gloria could vouch for him, that he'd just bought snacks for his mom. But years of watching the news, of hearing stories, of his mother's careful warnings all crystallized into one thought: stay quiet, stay still, stay alive. The strawberries had burst open on impact, their red juice seeping across the gray concrete like tiny rivers. His chips were crushed, the bag torn open. And his sketchbook. His precious sketchbook with months of work, with pieces of his soul captured in graphite and ink, lay splayed open on the sidewalk. "Get him up," someone ordered. Rough hands hauled Malik to his feet. His legs shook as they marched him toward the nearest cruiser. He caught a glimpse of Mr. Martinez in the store window, phone pressed to his ear, face etched with concern. The officer pushed Malik's head down, guiding him into the back seat of the police car. The door slammed shut with a heavy finality, sealing him in a cage of metal and glass. Through the window, he could see his sketchbook still lying on the ground, its pages fluttering in the spring breeze that had felt so pleasant just moments ago. As the cruiser pulled away from the curb, Malik watched his art, his voice, his dreams, his scholarship hopes, disappear into the distance. The pages danced like broken wings in his wake, and for the first time since the officers appeared, tears began to well in his eyes. The car turned a corner and his sketchbook vanished from view. Malik sat in silence, his wrists aching, his heart pounding, and his mind fixed on those scattered pages that held so much more than just drawings. They held his future, and now they were drifting away on the wind like autumn leaves, carried off to places he couldn't follow. Hours later, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the small interrogation room, casting harsh shadows across the metal table where Malik sat alone. His shoulders trembled, partly from the room's cold air and partly from fear. The thin t-shirt he wore offered little warmth. They'd taken his hoodie as evidence. Two detectives loomed over him. The taller one, Detective Morris, paced back and forth while his partner, Detective Weber, leaned against the wall with arms crossed. Their shadows danced across the institutional gray walls like lurking giants. "We have witnesses who saw you running from the GameStop," Detective Morris said, his voice sharp. "Why don't you make this easier on yourself?" Malik's throat felt dry. "I wasn't there. I was at the library." "Sure you were," Detective Weber snorted. He pushed off from the wall and dropped a manila folder onto the table. Papers spilled out, grainy security camera photos, witness statements Malik couldn't read from his angle. "We've got your prints at the scene." "That's impossible," Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper. He wrapped his arms around himself, trying to stop shivering. Detective Morris slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot, making Malik flinch. "Stop lying. We have evidence placing you there. A blue hoodie, your build, your age, everything matches." "I want my mom," Malik said. "Don't I get to call my mom?" "You can call your mother after you tell us the truth," Detective Weber said. He spread the papers across the table. "See this? Security footage shows someone your exact height and build. Same clothes, same everything." Malik squinted at the blurry images. The figure was just a dark shape, impossible to identify. "That's not me. I was scanning my artwork at the library. Miss Gloria was there, she can tell you." "Convenient story," Detective Morris sneered. "But we've got more than just footage. We've got a partial print from a glove matching the ones we found in your backpack. Malik's art gloves, the ones he used to keep graphite off his hands while drawing." His stomach twisted as he realized how they were twisting everything about him into something sinister. Meanwhile, in the station's waiting area, Renee Henderson paced frantically. Her heels clicked against the linoleum floor as she moved back and forth, her phone clutched in her hand. Every few minutes, she approached the desk sergeant, only to receive the same response. "Ma'am, as I told you, you can't see him right now. The detectives are still conducting their investigation." Renee's hands shook as she dialed the public defender's office again. The recording played for the 5th time. "You've reached the office of the public defender. Our office is currently closed. Please call back during business hours." She ended the call and stared at her phone. Her thumb hovered over another number, one she hadn't dialed in years. Langston Pryor, the father who'd chosen career over family, the man who'd become U.S. Attorney General while his son grew up without him. She pressed the number, but before it could ring, she quickly ended the call. She couldn't open that door again. Not yet. In his office, Officer Brent Ralston typed up his report with practiced efficiency. His fingers moved across the keyboard as he crafted the narrative he wanted. Suspect matched witness descriptions perfectly. Partial prints recovered from the scene consistent with gloves found in suspect's possession. Suspect's clothing and appearance aligned with typical patterns observed in similar crimes. Ralston had a reputation in the department. His arrest reports stuck. His cases led to convictions. He knew exactly which phrases to use, which details to emphasize, which implications to suggest without stating outright. Race, clothing, neighborhood. It all went into the subtle painting of a picture that judges and juries would recognize from their own prejudices. The next morning, the fluorescent lights in courtroom 3B hummed just as they had in the interrogation room. Malik stood before Judge Barrett Royce, his hands cuffed in front of him. He wore an orange jumpsuit now. His own clothes had been taken as evidence. The courtroom was nearly empty at this early hour. Just a few clerks, a bored-looking bailiff, and his mother sitting in the back row, her eyes red from crying and lack of sleep. The public defender beside him, Mr. Hayes, had only met him 5 minutes before the hearing. He hadn't even opened the case file. Judge Royce peered down from his bench, his expression as cold as the marble walls around them. His gaze never quite met Malik's. Instead, he looked at the papers before him, as if they told him everything he needed to know about the teenager standing in his courtroom. Docket number 2023 JD 1457, People versus Malik Henderson, the clerk announced. Charges are armed robbery, possession of a weapon during the commission of a crime, and resisting arrest. "How does the defendant plead?" Judge Royce asked, his tone making it clear he'd already made up his mind. "Not guilty, Your Honor," Mr. Hayes said, stifling a yawn. Judge Royce's lips tightened. "Bail arguments?" The prosecutor stepped forward, a young woman in a crisp suit. "The people request remand, Your Honor. The defendant poses a significant flight risk. He's charged with violent felonies, was apprehended near the scene, and the evidence against him is substantial." "Your Honor," Mr. Hayes interrupted, finally showing some animation. "My client has no prior record. He's an honor student with strong community ties. His mother is here. The severity of the charges cannot be overlooked," Judge Royce cut in. His gavel hung ready in his hand. "The court finds that the defendant poses a risk to public safety and is a flight risk. Bail is denied. The defendant is remanded to juvenile detention pending trial." The gavel came down with a crack that made Malik's whole body jolt. Behind him, he heard his mother's muffled sob. "Next case," Judge Royce called out, already looking past Malik to whatever file was next on his desk. The bailiff took Malik's arm, leading him toward the side door. As he walked, he caught a final glimpse of his mother. She stood in the back of the courtroom, one hand pressed against her mouth, the other reaching toward him as if she could somehow bridge the distance between them. The heavy door swung shut, cutting off his view of the courtroom. The bailiff's grip remained firm as they walked down the corridor toward the juvenile holding area. Each step took Malik further from his mother, his home, his art, his future, everything that made him who he was. 2 months had carved deep shadows under Malik's eyes as he shuffled into the courtroom. The borrowed suit hung loose on his frame. He'd lost weight in juvenile detention, where anxiety chewed away his appetite as steadily as time chewed away his hope. His wrists ached from the cold metal of the handcuffs, but he kept a tight grip on the rolled paper in his hands, a sketch of his mother drawn from memory during the endless nights in his cell. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly pallor over everything and everyone. The courtroom's wooden benches were filled with strangers, their faces blurring together as Malik made his way to the defense table. His public defender, Mr. Hayes, barely looked up from his phone as Malik sat down. Elena Vasquez sat at her clerk's station, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. She'd been watching this case closely ever since she'd noticed the first irregularities in the filing system. Documents that should have been there weren't. Evidence logs that didn't match their contents. Small things that added up to something wrong. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. All rise. The Honorable Judge Barrett Royce presiding. Judge Royce swept in, his black robes flowing behind him like dark wings. He settled into his chair with the confidence of a man who'd already written the ending to this story. "You may be seated," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Are both sides ready to proceed?" The prosecutor stood sleek and prepared. "Ready, Your Honor?" Mr. Hayes scrambled to his feet, his tie slightly askew. "Ready, Your Honor." The trial moved at a pace that made Elena's stomach turn. The prosecution's case felt rehearsed, each piece falling into place with practiced precision. When they called their star witness, Gerald McKinney, a 65-year-old retired accountant, Elena watched Judge Royce lean forward with interest. "And can you identify the person you saw running from the GameStop that night?" the prosecutor asked. McKinney squinted across the courtroom at Malik. "Yes, that's him. Same build, same, general appearance." Elena's fingers tightened on her pen as she watched Mr. Hayes barely cross-examine the witness. No questions about lighting conditions, no challenges to the cross-racial identification, no mention of the fact that McKinney had been over 50 feet away at dusk. Throughout the morning, Elena noticed Judge Royce repeatedly glancing at his watch, rushing through objections, cutting off any attempt by the defense to delve deeper into the evidence. When the prosecution rested their case, it was barely past lunch. The defense presentation was even shorter. Mr. Hayes called no witnesses. Malik had been alone at the library. There was no one to verify his alibi except the librarian, who couldn't be located. The security cameras had been malfunctioning that day. Elena's heart raced as she watched Judge Royce deliberately set aside documents she knew contained exculpatory evidence, proof that the glove prints didn't match, witness statements describing a suspect 6 inches taller than Malik, time-stamped photos from other security cameras that could have cleared him. She'd seen these documents in the file just yesterday. Now they were gone. Outside in the hallway, Renee Henderson fought against the crowd pressing against the courtroom doors. "Please," she begged the court officers blocking her path. "That's my son in there. I need to see my son." "Ma'am, the courtroom is at capacity," one officer said firmly. "You'll have to wait out here." Renee pressed her hands against the small window in the door, trying to catch a glimpse of Malik. All she could see was the back of his head, his shoulders hunched under the too big suit jacket. Inside, the closing arguments were brief. The prosecutor painted a picture of a calculated criminal, turning Malik's quiet nature into something sinister. Mr. Hayes' defense was perfunctory, a token effort that barely touched on the holes in the prosecution's case. Judge Royce's instructions to the jury were equally rushed. Elena typed frantically, trying to keep up with his words while fighting the nausea building in her stomach. This wasn't justice. This was an assembly line. The jury filed out. Elena watched the clock on the wall tick by. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. When they returned, their faces were set with the certainty of people who'd made up their minds long before they entered the courthouse. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Royce asked, though Elena could see him already reaching for his sentencing papers. The foreman stood. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of armed robbery, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of possession of a weapon during the commission of a crime, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of resisting arrest, we find the defendant guilty." Each guilty landed like a physical blow. Malik sat perfectly still, the rolled sketch crumpling in his grip. Elena saw his lips move slightly. Maybe a prayer, maybe his mother's name. Judge Royce didn't wait a moment before launching into his sentencing speech. "Malik Henderson, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers. The evidence of your crimes is overwhelming. You represent a clear and present danger to society, and this court has a duty to protect the public from individuals like yourself who show no regard for law and order." Through the window in the courtroom door, Renee watched in horror as Judge Royce continued. It is therefore the sentence of this court that you be committed to the Department of Corrections for a term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The words echoed through the courtroom, through the door, through Renee's heart. She collapsed, her legs giving way beneath her. Her cry of anguish cut through the hallway's bureaucratic buzz, bringing everyone to a startled halt. Court officers rushed to her side, but she barely felt their hands trying to help her up. Inside the courtroom, Malik remained frozen in his chair. The sketch of his mother slipped from his numb fingers, unrolling as it fell to reveal the careful lines that had kept him sane during his detention. His mother's smile, her kind eyes, the strength he'd always seen in her face. Two court officers moved to either side of him. He didn't resist as they took his arms, didn't speak as they began to lead him away. His eyes stayed fixed straight ahead, seeing nothing, as his world collapsed into a single impossible moment. Elena watched him go, her hands shaking over her keyboard. She looked down at her screen, at the transcript she'd just typed, a record of injustice rendered in clean, professional font. Her eyes moved to the stack of missing documents hidden in her desk drawer, and something inside her shifted. The intake process at Central Juvenile Correctional Center stripped away whatever dignity Malik had left. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he stood in line with other new arrivals, all of them avoiding eye contact, all of them trying to disappear into themselves. "Henderson," a guard with a clipboard barked his name. "Step forward." Malik moved mechanically, his mother's sketch still clutched in his hand. The guard eyed it with suspicion. "Arms out," the guard ordered. "Turn around slowly." The search was thorough and humiliating. Malik kept his eyes fixed on a crack in the concrete floor, counting the seconds, trying to remember how to breathe. The guard's latex-covered hands were cold and impersonal. "Strip," came the next command. "Everything goes in the bin." Malik's fingers trembled as he removed his court clothes, the ill-fitting suit that had failed to convince the jury of his innocence. Each piece felt like shedding another layer of his identity. The guard watched impassively, marking items off on his clipboard. "The paper too," the guard said, pointing to the sketch. Malik's hand tightened around it. "Please," he whispered, his first word since the verdict. "It's just a drawing." The guard's face hardened. "Either you put it in the bin, or I put it in the trash. Your choice." With shaking hands, Malik carefully folded the sketch and placed it in the plastic bin with his clothes. The guard whisked it away, and Malik stood naked and vulnerable under the harsh lights. A different guard thrust a stack of orange clothing at him. "Get dressed, quick." The juvenile detention uniform was stiff and scratchy against his skin. The pants were too short, the shirt too wide. Everything smelled of industrial detergent and hopelessness. They took his fingerprints again, though they already had them from his arrest. They photographed him from multiple angles, his prisoner number displayed on a board beneath his chin. They drew blood, checked his teeth, and documented his identifying marks like he was livestock being processed. "Medical screening," another guard announced, leading him to a small examination room. The questions were invasive, the examinations perfunctory. The nurse barely looked at him as she filled out form after form. Any history of mental illness? Any drug use? Any sexual activity? Any thoughts of self-harm? Malik shook his head to each question, his voice lost somewhere in the hollow of his chest. Finally, a guard led him through a series of heavy doors, each one clanging shut behind them with devastating finality. The juvenile block was a maze of identical corridors and cramped cells. The air was thick with tension and fear. "Cell 247, the guard said, stopping at a small concrete room with 2 metal bunks. "Top bunk's yours. Don't make trouble." Malik climbed onto the thin mattress, careful not to make eye contact with his cellmate below. The guard's footsteps echoed away, leaving him alone with the sound of his own heartbeat. Hours passed. Malik lay still, watching shadows creep across the wall. When dinner was announced, he didn't move. When rec time was called, he stayed put. It wasn't until the evening phone block was announced that something stirred inside him. The common phone room was a narrow space with 6 payphones mounted on the wall, each separated by small metal dividers that offered the illusion of privacy. Malik stood in line, watching other inmates make their calls, some arguing, some crying, some trying to sound tough. When his turn came, he stared at the phone for a long moment. His mother's number was useless. She couldn't afford the collect call fees, and anyway, what could she do? The public defender's office hadn't helped him before. They wouldn't start now. There was one other number, though. One his mother had made him memorize years ago, drilling it into his head even after he'd insisted he'd never need it. Langston Pryor's private line. Malik's finger hovered over the keypad. 10 years was a long time. 10 years of birthdays without cards, of achievements without acknowledgement, of holidays spent wondering why he wasn't enough to make his father stay. He dialed. In Washington, D.C., Langston Pryor stood at a podium, his voice carrying authority through the packed press room. Camera flashes punctuated his carefully worded statements about justice reform and prosecutorial discretion. His phone buzzed in his pocket. An unknown number. He ignored it. The Department of Justice remains committed to ensuring equal treatment under the law, he continued, his practiced smile never wavering. We are implementing new guidelines for federal prosecutors. The phone buzzed again. Same number. Langston felt a flicker of annoyance, but something else too, a nagging sense that he shouldn't ignore it. If you'll excuse me for a moment, he said smoothly to the assembled press corps. We'll take a brief recess. He stepped into the hallway, adjusting his tie as he answered the phone. This is Langston Pryor. The line crackled with static. There was breathing on the other end, hesitant and uncertain. Hello? Langston said, his patience thinning. Who is this? Dad! The word hit Langston like a physical blow. His hand gripped the phone tighter as memories flooded back. A small boy's laughter, tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb, tears at a playground goodbye that turned out to be forever. It's Malik, the voice continued, barely above a whisper. I need help. Langston's world tilted on its axis. His son's voice was deeper than he remembered, but he could hear the child in it still. Could hear fear and desperation and something breaking. The silence stretched between them, heavy with a decade of absence. Malik's breath hitched, a small crack in his composure, and then there was nothing but the sound of static and shared breathing. Langston's free hand pressed against the wall, steadying himself. The press room door opened behind him, an aide gesturing urgently about the waiting reporters. But Langston didn't move, didn't hang up. He stood there in his $1,000 suit, in the hallway of power he'd chosen over fatherhood, and listened to his son breathe. Meanwhile, Langston Pryor sat in his leather chair, the morning sun casting long shadows across his mahogany desk. The phone lay before him like a loaded weapon. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, after Malik's call. The boy's voice echoed in his head, a haunting reminder of everything he'd walked away from. His office was quiet, insulated from the usual morning bustle of the Department of Justice. He'd canceled his morning meetings, citing a personal matter. His staff knew better than to question it. The U.S. Attorney General rarely took personal time. With trembling fingers, he logged into the secure DOJ database. The search field blinked, waiting. He typed, Henderson, Malik. The results loaded instantly, each document more disturbing than the last. The arrest report was riddled with inconsistencies. Officer Brent Ralston's description of the suspect changed 3 times. The witness statements were vague at best, contradictory at worst. The surveillance footage was grainy, showing only a figure in a dark hoodie, a description that could match thousands of young men. Langston's jaw clenched as he read the trial transcript. The whole thing had lasted less than 2 days. The public defender had called no witnesses, presented no alibi. The prosecution's case rested almost entirely on circumstantial evidence and a partial glove print that the lab had marked as inconclusive. But it was Judge Barrett Royce's record that made his blood run cold. Page after page showed a clear pattern. Young, black defendants, rushed trials, maximum sentences. The statistics were damning. Royce's conviction rate for minority defendants was nearly double that of his peers. Dear God, Langston whispered, pushing back from his desk. His hands were shaking now, not from guilt, but from rage. The system he'd dedicated his life to, the justice he'd sworn to uphold. It had swallowed his son whole. He picked up his phone, scrolling to Renee's number. He'd kept it all these years, though he'd never used it. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried again. And again. "Renee," he said after the third attempt. "It's Langston. Malik called me. Please, we need to talk." The words felt inadequate, hollow. What could he possibly say to the woman he'd abandoned, to the mother who'd protected their son from his world of political compromises and calculated decisions? He remembered their last real conversation 15 years ago. He'd just been offered a position as a federal prosecutor, a stepping stone to greater things. "You can't have both," Renee had said, holding 3-year-old Malik close. "This life you want, this power you're chasing, it'll corrupt everything it touches. I won't let it touch him." She'd been right, of course. He'd chosen ambition, telling himself it was for the greater good. He'd send money, stay informed from a distance, make changes from the inside that would benefit all children, not just his own. Now his son was in juvenile detention, facing life without parole, and all his power felt worthless. Langston picked up his phone again, this time dialing a number he rarely used. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. "This better be important, Langston. I'm supposed to be retired." "Professor Matthews," Langston said, "I need your counsel." "The Attorney General needs my counsel?" Matthews chuckled. "Must be serious." "It's about my son." The line went quiet. Matthews had been one of the few people who knew about Malik, who'd understood Langston's choices without judging them. "Tell me," Matthews said. Langston explained everything. The arrest, the trial, Judge Royce's record. His voice cracked when he described Malik's phone call. "Jesus, Langston," Matthews breathed, "this is a powder keg. I have to help him." "Think this through," Matthews warned. "You're the Attorney General? Getting involved in your estranged son's case? The optics alone would be devastating. The right would call it corruption, the left would call it privilege. Your enemies would use it to dismantle everything you've built." "I don't care about—" "Yes, you do," Matthews cut in. "You've always cared. That's why you left. But listen to me. If you do this, it's career suicide. Everything you've worked for, every reform you've pushed through, every case you've built, it all goes up in smoke." Langston stared out his window at the Washington Monument rising in the distance, symbol of truth, of integrity. He'd spent his life climbing toward that ideal, believing he could change things from the inside. "What would you do?" he asked quietly. Matthews sighed. "I'd remember why I became a lawyer in the first place. And then I'd do what needs to be done. Consequences be damned." After hanging up, Langston sat motionless for several minutes. Then he stood, straightened his tie, and walked out of his office. The legal analysis department was already buzzing with activity. Young lawyers fresh out of top schools, idealistic and sharp, hunched over computers and case files. Langston scanned the room, mentally checking off names. "Chen, Rodriguez, Thompson, Williams," he called out. "My office, now." The 4 analysts looked up, startled. They were all outsiders in their own way. Children of immigrants, scholarship kids, first-generation lawyers. More importantly, they were hungry for justice and hadn't been in the system long enough to become cynical. Once they were assembled in his office, Langston closed the door and lowered the blinds. "What I'm about to ask you to do is completely off the books," he began. "If anyone asks, this conversation never happened. If you're not comfortable with that, leave now." No one moved. "I need everything you can find on Judge Barrett Royce, Officer Brent Ralston, and the Metro Police Forensics Lab. Every case, every ruling, every complaint. Focus on the last 5 years. Look for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that doesn't add up." Sarah Chen raised her hand slightly. "Sir, that's a lot of data. Are we looking for something specific?" "You'll know it when you see it," Langston replied. "And one more thing. This stays between us. No paper trail, no electronic footprints. Everything gets reported directly to me." The analysts exchanged glances, understanding the gravity of what was being asked. This wasn't just another case. This was their boss, the U.S. Attorney General, asking them to investigate the system itself. "We're on it, sir," Marcus Thompson said, speaking for the group. Langston nodded, dismissing them. As they filed out, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window, the same ambitious man who'd walked away from his son all those years ago. But now, finally, he was walking back. Meanwhile, Elena sat cross-legged on her worn beige couch, case notes spread across her coffee table like puzzle pieces. The small lamp beside her cast a warm glow over the documents, but nothing could soften the cold facts they contained. Her one-bedroom apartment was quiet except for the gentle hum of the ancient heating unit and the occasional car passing on the street below. She picked up her legal pad, reviewing her careful handwriting. Every detail from Malik Henderson's trial was there, documented in her precise style. The missing toxicology report that had mysteriously vanished from the evidence file, Judge Royce's unusual haste during key testimony, the sealed envelope that should have gone to the defense but somehow never made it across the courtroom. Her stomach clenched as she remembered Malik's face when the verdict was read. Just a boy, really. His eyes had been wide, disbelieving, as if he couldn't quite process what was happening. She'd seen that look before on other defendants, but something about this case was different. Elena reached for her cooling cup of chamomile tea, her hand trembling slightly. The ceramic mug had a chip on the rim, a small imperfection that reminded her of the flaws she kept finding in Malik's case. Little cracks that, when viewed together, formed a disturbing pattern. She'd been raised to respect authority, to keep her head down and do her job. Her parents had taught her that survival meant staying invisible, especially for people like them. But the weight of what she'd witnessed sat heavy in her chest, making it hard to breathe. The trial replay looped in her mind like a bad movie. Judge Royce had rushed through crucial testimony, cutting off the defense's cross-examination with barely concealed impatience. She remembered his stern face, the way he'd glanced at his watch repeatedly during the proceedings. At the time, she'd attributed it to his usual efficiency. Now, she wasn't so sure. Elena pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. She'd started documenting everything: times, dates, unusual occurrences. It was a habit she'd developed early in her career, a way to protect herself in a system that often seemed designed to overlook people like her. The next morning, Elena arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual. The security guard, Jim, gave her a friendly nod as she passed through the metal detector. Her sensible shoes made little noise on the polished floor as she made her way to the file room. The fluorescent lights flickered to life as she entered, illuminating rows of metal filing cabinets. The air was thick with the musty smell of old paper and dust. She moved purposefully to the recent cases section, her heart beating a little faster with each step. When she found the Henderson case files, her suspicions deepened. They were already tagged with red archival stickers, a process that usually took months, not days. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled out the main folder. There it was, right on top, a memo signed by Judge Royce himself, requesting expedited archival processing. The date stamp showed it had been filed less than 24 hours after the verdict. Elena had worked in the court system long enough to know this wasn't normal procedure. She glanced over her shoulder, though she knew she was alone. The early morning light was just beginning to filter through the high windows, casting long shadows between the filing cabinets. She had maybe 30 minutes before anyone else would arrive. With practiced efficiency, Elena began scanning documents into the system. Her personal drive was hidden in plain sight, a nondescript USB stick with a library logo. To anyone else, it would look like she was simply doing routine digitization. Each document told part of the story: rushed proceedings, missing evidence, procedural shortcuts that added up to something far more sinister. She worked methodically, making sure each file was properly copied while maintaining its original order in the folder. Back at her desk later that morning, Elena's mind raced as she tried to focus on her regular duties. The weight of the USB drive in her pocket felt like a ticking bomb. During her lunch break, she slipped into the bathroom and used her personal phone to compose an email. She'd found the lawyer's contact information through careful research. Sarah Chen, a junior analyst on Langston Pryor's team. The email was brief, carefully worded. Have information regarding Henderson case irregularities. Request private meeting. Urgent. Elena added it to her draft folder, her finger hovering over the send button. Everything she'd been taught about self-preservation screamed at her to delete it. Instead, she pressed send. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine tasks and nervous glances. Every time Judge Royce passed her desk, she felt her heart skip a beat. But he barely looked at her, just as he had barely looked at her for the past 5 years she'd worked there. That evening, Elena was heating up leftover arroz con pollo when her phone rang. Her brother Marco's name flashed on the screen. She answered with her usual greeting, but his voice stopped her cold. "Elena, something's wrong," Marco said, his words coming fast and frightened. "My manager called me into his office today, said he got word that ICE is doing checks in the area. He was trying to warn me, Elena, they're looking at employee records." The wooden spoon she'd been holding clattered to the floor. Marco worked at a warehouse across town, nowhere near the courthouse, nowhere near anything connected to the Henderson case. This wasn't a coincidence. "Are you sure?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Jose and Carmen got the same warning," Marco continued, referring to other undocumented workers. "This isn't random, Elena. Something's happening." Elena sank into a kitchen chair, her dinner forgotten. The implications were clear. Someone had noticed her actions, had traced her family connections. This was a warning, subtle but unmistakable. She thought of the USB drive still in her pocket, of the email she'd sent just hours ago. She thought of her parents, who'd worked so hard to build a life here, of Marco's 2 young daughters who'd never known any other home. "Marco, listen to me," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "Don't go to work tomorrow. Call in sick. I'll figure something out." After hanging up, Elena sat in her darkening kitchen, the only light coming from the small bulb above her stove. The choice before her was stark: stay quiet and protect her family, or speak up and risk everything they'd built. Sometime later, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Malik sat on his thin mattress, staring at the gray concrete walls of his cell. 3 weeks had passed since his arrival at Central Juvenile Correctional Center, each day blending into the next in a monotonous rhythm of counts, meals, and controlled movements. His new cellmate, Jamal, had been watching him quietly for days. Unlike the others who tried to test new inmates with threats or challenges, Jamal simply observed. He was older, maybe in his 30s, with calm eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. That morning, as they returned from breakfast, Jamal reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to Malik without ceremony. "Go on," Jamal said softly. "Open it." Malik's hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal. Inside were 5 sheets of clean white sketch paper, not the cheap notebook paper from commissary, but real artist paper with a subtle texture. He ran his fingers over the surface, remembering the feel of his old sketchbook. "Paper is power in here," Jamal said, sitting on his own bunk. "Use it before they take it." Malik looked up, questions in his eyes. "Everything in here gets taken eventually," Jamal explained. "Your dignity, your connections, your sense of time. But what you create with that paper, that's yours. That's real." For the first time since his arrival, Malik felt a spark of something like hope. He carefully tucked the paper under his mattress, saving it for the right moment. That moment came during yard time the next day. Malik found a relatively quiet spot against the fence and pulled out the first sheet. He had managed to get a pencil from the education center, nothing special, but it would do. He started with Marcus, an older inmate who worked in the kitchen. Marcus always saved extra fruit for the younger guys, sneaking it to them with a wink. As Malik sketched, Marcus told him about his daughter's poetry competitions, reciting one of her verses from memory. Malik worked the words into the drawing, letting them flow around Marcus's gentle eyes and weather-worn face. Next was Deshaun, barely 18, who hummed Motown songs while mopping the halls. In his portrait, Malik captured the way Deshaun's face lit up when he talked about learning to play piano from his grandmother. The music notes seemed to dance across the paper. Each portrait took time, not just in the drawing but in the listening. Malik learned about Carlos's dream of opening a restaurant, about Tony's collection of sci-fi books, about William's talent for growing things in the small prison garden. These weren't their mugshots or their case numbers. These were their real faces, their real stories. Jamal watched from a distance as the dynamic in their block began to shift. The usual tension, always simmering beneath the surface, seemed to quiet. Men who normally avoided eye contact would stop to look at Malik's work, sharing their own stories, asking to be next. "You're giving them back something they lost," Jamal told him one evening. "Their humanity." Malik understood. Each portrait was an acknowledgement. "I see you. You matter. You're more than this place." During his scheduled phone call with his mother, Malik wanted to tell her about the portraits, about how something as simple as paper and pencil could create connections in a place designed to break them. But as soon as he heard Renee's voice, he knew something was wrong. "Baby, how are you?" she asked, trying to sound normal, but Malik caught the strain in her voice. "I'm okay, Mom. What's going on? Are you all right?" There was a pause, the sound of movement like she was walking to a different room. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "They're watching me too." Malik's heart clenched. "Who's watching?" "I don't know for sure, but there are cars parked outside our building at strange hours. My emails at work are acting weird. Yesterday, my supervisor called me in to ask about some old vacation requests from months ago." Malik gripped the phone harder, wishing he could reach through it and protect her somehow. "Mom, be careful. Maybe you should—" "No," she cut him off firmly. "Don't worry about me. I'm not letting them scare me away from fighting for you. Just take care of yourself in there, okay?" After the call, Malik returned to his cell, his mind racing. Jamal took one look at his face and knew something was wrong, but he didn't push for details. That night, Malik finished the last of the 5 portraits. He looked at them spread out on his bunk. Marcus with his daughter's poetry, Deshaun with his music, Carlos dreaming of his restaurant, Tony surrounded by his beloved books, and William tending his garden. The next morning, he carefully slipped the portraits into an envelope. He had heard about a volunteer art program that displayed inmate artwork in community spaces. The address was posted in the education center. Malik wrote a fake name as the sender. Prison rules didn't allow artwork to be signed with real names anyway. He added the program's address, making sure each number and letter was clear and legible. Before sealing the envelope, he looked at the portraits one last time. He didn't know if anyone would see them, if they would make it past the prison mail screeners, if they would matter to anyone outside these walls. But as he handed the envelope to the volunteer coordinator during afternoon programs, he felt something settle in his chest. It was a small act of defiance, using paper and pencil to show the world who they really were. It was a way of saying, "You can lock us up, but you can't erase our stories. You can't erase our humanity." Jamal was waiting in their cell when Malik returned. "Did you send them?" he asked. Malik nodded. "Good," Jamal said simply, and they both understood that whatever happened next, something important had begun. The small coffee shop sat just outside the city limits, nestled between a laundromat and a used bookstore. At this hour, only a few customers lingered over their laptops, making it the perfect place for a discreet meeting. Elena Vasquez chose a corner booth, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of untouched coffee as she watched the door. 2 people entered, a man and a woman in business casual attire that was just a touch too neat for the neighborhood. They scanned the room briefly before heading to her table. Elena recognized them from the photos they'd sent to verify their identities, members of Langston Pryor's personal legal team. "Ms. Vasquez?" the woman asked softly, sliding into the booth. "I'm Sarah Chen, and this is Marcus Wright. Thank you for meeting us." Elena's fingers drummed against her coffee cup. Her usual methodical demeanor was fractured by obvious anxiety, dark circles under her eyes betraying sleepless nights. "Did anyone follow you?" "We took precautions," Marcus assured her. "Changed cars twice, varied our route." Elena nodded, then reached into her bag with trembling hands. She withdrew a small USB drive, plain and unmarked. For a moment, she just held it, as if weighing the consequences one final time. "Your son," she said, looking directly at Marcus, whom she knew was Langston's representative, "was never supposed to be convicted. The judge made sure of it. She placed the drive on the table and slid it across. Sarah picked it up and tucked it away in an inner pocket of her blazer. "Can you tell us what's on it?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice low. Elena leaned forward, her words coming faster now. "Court memos, internal communications, a deleted file with timestamps. But the most important thing is the traffic camera footage that was supposed to be entered into evidence." "Traffic camera footage?" Sarah's eyebrows rose. "From the intersection of Grant and 42nd, it shows Malik walking home from the library at the exact time the robbery was happening across town. Judge Royce had it removed before trial." Elena's voice cracked slightly. "I saw him do it. He took the file himself, said it needed to be reviewed for technical issues. It never came back." Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances. This was bigger than they'd expected. "There's more," Elena continued. "Judge Royce's nephew, Thomas Royce, sits on the board of directors at Central Juvenile Correctional Center, the same facility where Malik was sent. The connection wasn't disclosed during sentencing." Sarah pulled out a small notebook, jotting down notes. "How did you discover the connection?" "I processed judicial disclosure forms. Judge Royce listed his nephew as a dependent on his taxes but conveniently left out his position at the prison." Elena's hands were steadier now, anger replacing fear. "I started digging after that. The more I looked, the more I found." Back at Langston's private office in D.C., a team gathered around a large screen. The USB drive's contents were being carefully examined by Devin Morris, their top cybersecurity advisor. He clicked through files methodically, his expression growing more concerned. "The traffic cam footage is here," Devin said, pulling up a video file. "But something's not right." The grainy footage showed Malik walking past the library, his distinctive sketchbook under his arm. The timestamp matched the time of the robbery. But Devin pointed to anomalies in the metadata. "See these gaps? The file's been accessed multiple times from unauthorized terminals. Someone tried to corrupt it, make it unusable in court. But they didn't completely destroy it. Probably couldn't without leaving obvious traces." Langston stood behind them, his usual commanding presence subdued by the weight of what they were uncovering. "Can you verify its authenticity?" "Already running a forensic analysis, we'll know soon if it's been tampered with." Devin typed rapidly, launching several programs. "But from what I can see so far, this looks like the original footage." In another corner of the office, Rachel Martinez, one of Langston's senior analysts, burst in with a stack of papers. "Sir, you need to see this." She spread out reports and data sheets across a conference table. "The forensic lab that processed the evidence in Malik's case, Fuller Forensic Services. I've been reviewing their case history over the past 5 years." "What did you find?" Langston asked, though something in her tone suggested he already knew. "A pattern of errors in evidence processing, contaminated samples, mishandled chain of custody, incorrect conclusions." Rachel pointed to a graph. "But here's the kicker. When I broke down the data by defendant demographics, it's not random. The errors consistently appear in cases involving minority defendants. The error rate is nearly 8 times higher than in cases with white defendants." Langston's jaw tightened. "How many cases?" "Over 200 that I've confirmed so far, and those are just the ones where the errors were caught and documented." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about Malik anymore. This was systematic. Across town, Elena inserted her key into her apartment door, then froze. The door moved slightly under her touch. It was already ajar. Her heart pounding, she pushed it open slowly. Nothing seemed disturbed at first glance. The furniture was in place. No drawers had been pulled open. Her laptop still sat on the coffee table. But then she saw them. Her brother's immigration documents, normally kept secured in a locked file box, were scattered across the living room floor. His green card application, work permits, tax returns. All the carefully organized paperwork that proved his legal status was spread out like a twisted art installation. A clear message. "We know who you are and we know who you care about." Elena's hand shook as she gathered the papers, checking each one to make sure nothing was missing. Everything was there. They hadn't taken anything. This wasn't a theft. It was a warning. Moving quickly now, she closed and locked the door, sliding the security chain into place. She went to her bedroom and pulled out a duffel bag from under the bed. She had known this might happen, had prepared for it. Now it was just a matter of executing the plan. Clothes went into the bag first, then important documents, her backup hard drive, and the emergency cash she'd been saving. She worked methodically despite her fear, years of handling court documents having trained her to be organized even in crisis. As she zipped up the bag, her phone buzzed with a text from her brother. "You okay?" Boss acting weird today, asking lots of questions. Elena stared at the message, understanding flowing through her like ice water. They weren't just coming after her. They were applying pressure from all sides. She set the packed bag by the door and took one last look around her apartment. Everything else could be replaced. What mattered now was staying safe and making sure the truth she'd uncovered made it to the right people. Meanwhile, Langston leaned closer to the monitor, his forehead creasing as Devin Morris manipulated the traffic camera footage frame by frame. Something felt off, but he couldn't quite place it. The video showed Malik walking past the library, sketchbook tucked under his arm, exactly where he said he'd been during the robbery. "Watch the shadows," Devin said, pointing to the ground beneath a parked car. "See how they shift? Not with the sun's position, but independently." He advanced the footage slowly. "And look at the license plates." Langston squinted. "They're too clear?" "Exactly." Devin nodded. Traffic cam footage is usually grainy, especially at this distance, but these plates are perfectly legible, almost like they were added in post-processing. The cybersecurity expert pulled up another window, this one showing a complex analysis of the video's metadata. "The biggest tell is in the subject movements. Human beings don't move like this." He gestured to Malik's figure in the footage. "The head motions are too smooth, too regular. Real people have micro movements, little twitches and adjustments. This is artificially generated." "Deep-faked," Langston said, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. "High-quality work, too. Would have fooled most people." Devin typed rapidly, pulling up more technical data. "But they got cocky. Left too many markers in the rendering." Langston straightened, his jaw tight. "Can you trace where it came from?" "Already on it." Devin's fingers flew across the keyboard. "The file signature leads back to... Interesting. A company called Digitech Solutions." "Never heard of them." "You wouldn't have. They're a third-party contractor that provides technical support to the Department of Judicial Technology." Devin pulled up the company's registration documents. They handled digital evidence processing for several courts in the district, including Judge Royce's. Langston's team worked through the night following the digital breadcrumbs. Digitech Solutions led to another company, Virtual Evidence Management, which led to a holding company called Cornerstone Digital Assets. "Look at this," Rachel Martinez said, spreading out incorporation papers across Langston's desk. "Cornerstone Digital Assets? The CEO is William Thorne." "Should I know that name?" Langston asked, though something tugged at his memory. "He was Judge Royce's roommate in law school. They've maintained business connections for decades." Rachel pulled up more documents. "Thorne's company has been getting no-bid contracts for court technical services for the past 15 years. Sarah Chen joined them, carrying a fresh stack of financial records. The money trail is deliberately complicated, but it all connects. Digitech submits invoices to the court for digital evidence processing. The payments go through 3 different shell companies before ending up at Cornerstone, making it harder to trace the connection back to Royce," Langston concluded. Meanwhile, in the stark fluorescent light of Central Juvenile Correctional Center, Malik sat on his bunk, working on a new portrait. This one was of an older inmate named Marcus, who had told Malik about the daughter he hadn't seen in 12 years. The sketch captured not just Marcus's face, but the sadness in his eyes when he spoke about missing his child's entire childhood. Jamal entered their cell quietly, his usual calm demeanor tinged with concern. "We need to talk." Malik set down his pencil, recognizing the serious tone in his cellmate's voice. "Been hearing things," Jamal said, keeping his voice low. "Your name's coming up in guard meetings. They're calling you a troublemaker." Because of the drawings? Jamal nodded. Word got back about those portraits you've been sending out. Guards don't like inmates having any kind of voice on the outside. He sat on his own bunk, facing Malik. They're looking for an excuse. An excuse for what? To put you in solitary. Or worse. Jamal's eyes were grave. Had a kid in here last year, started writing poetry about prison conditions. Guards found contraband in his cell one day. Nobody believed he put it there himself, but it didn't matter. He got 3 more years added to his sentence. Malik looked down at the unfinished portrait in his hands. The drawings were his only way to fight back, to show the world the humanity behind these walls. I know what these mean to you, Jamal continued, but you need to stop. At least for now. They're watching too closely. In his Washington office, Langston received an unexpected call from a former clerk who'd worked in the federal courts. The woman, now retired, spoke cautiously, but with purpose. I saw your team's been looking into Judge Royce, she said. There's something you should know. Langston put the call on speaker so his team could hear. I'm listening. 8 years ago, Judge Marion Foster from the Ninth Circuit filed a formal complaint against Royce. She'd noticed a pattern in his sentencing of minority defendants, had statistical evidence showing racial bias. What happened to the complaint? Langston asked, though he suspected he knew. Buried. Foster was told it would hurt her chances for elevation to the appeals court if she pursued it. The committee that reviewed the complaint was headed by one of Royce's old mentors. The clerk's voice turned bitter. The system protected itself. Do you have any documentation? That's just it. All the official records were sealed, but I kept copies. Wasn't sure why at the time, just felt wrong how it was handled. She paused. I can get them to you, but be careful. Judge Foster tried to do the right thing and her career stalled. Never got that appeals court nomination. Started getting harder assignments, fewer clerk applications. They didn't just bury the complaint, they buried her too. After the call ended, Langston's office was silent. The implications were clear. They weren't just fighting one corrupt judge. They were up against an entire system designed to protect itself, to silence anyone who challenged it. Sarah Chen broke the silence. We need to move carefully. If they did this to a federal judge, they'll do worse to us, Rachel finished. Langston looked at the growing wall of evidence they'd assembled, the deep-faked video, the shell companies, the buried complaint. Each thread they pulled revealed another layer of corruption, another potential threat. The phone on his desk buzzed. A text from Elena. Brother's boss just fired him. No reason given. They're sending messages. Elena huddled in the small bedroom of the safe house, surrounded by stacks of documents she'd methodically organized over the past 3 days. The room was sparse, just a twin bed, a desk, and a lamp. But it felt safer than her apartment had in weeks. The legal aid nonprofit had moved her here quietly, using a network of volunteers to transport her belongings in small batches to avoid attention. She picked up another manila folder, this one containing internal memos from Judge Royce's chambers. Her hands trembled slightly as she remembered copying these files late one night, constantly looking over her shoulder. The memos revealed a pattern of communication between Royce and certain prosecutors, discussing cases before they were even filed. A soft knock at the door made her jump. It's Sarah, a familiar voice called. Sarah Chen, one of Langston's analysts, had been assigned as Elena's primary contact. Elena opened the door, letting the young lawyer in. Sarah carried 2 cups of coffee and a laptop. Ready to go through everything? They spent hours organizing the evidence. Elena explained each document's significance, pointing out subtle irregularities that only someone familiar with court procedures would notice. See these timestamps? She said, pointing to a series of emails. Judge Royce was accessing sealed files after hours when no clerk was present to log the activity. And these defendant assignments? Sarah asked, gesturing to a spreadsheet. Elena nodded. He specifically requested certain cases be transferred to his courtroom, always young minority defendants, always with overworked public defenders. She pulled out another file. And look at the conviction rates. Sarah whistled softly. Nearly 100%. In a system where the average is closer to 70%, Elena added. And the sentences were always maximum allowable. They worked through the afternoon, building a detailed timeline of corruption. Elena's meticulous note-taking had created a paper trail that couldn't be ignored. By evening, they had filled 3 boxes with documented evidence of judicial misconduct, racial bias, and procedural violations. Meanwhile, across town, Langston Pryor stood in the White House's West Wing, waiting to be called into the Oval Office. His heart pounded, though his exterior remained calm. He'd been in this building hundreds of times, but today felt different. "The president will see you now," an aide announced. President Matthews sat behind his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed a document. He didn't look up immediately when Langston entered. The power move wasn't lost on the Attorney General. "Sit down, Langston," the president finally said, removing his glasses. His tone was friendly, but his eyes were sharp. "We need to discuss this situation with Judge Royce." Langston settled into one of the chairs facing the desk. "Mr. President, let me speak first." Matthews leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "You've had an exemplary career, Langston. Risen through the ranks, played the game well, served this administration with distinction. That's why this recent activity concerns me." The president stood, walking to the window that overlooked the rose garden. "If you expose a sitting judge and the justice system's failures, you'll take the whole House down with you, including your own office." He turned back to face Langston. "Think about it. How many cases has Royce presided over? How many convictions would be called into question? The appeals alone would overwhelm the system for years." "Sir, if there's systematic corruption, there's always corruption somewhere, Langston. The question is how we handle it." Matthews returned to his desk. "There's an elegant solution here. Distance yourself from the case. Let it go quiet. I promise you it will work itself out." The implication was clear. Malik's case would be quietly resolved, but the larger system would remain untouched. "Your son will be free," Matthews added softly. "Isn't that what you wanted?" At Central Juvenile Correctional Center, the morning started with shouting. Guards stormed into Malik's block, ordering everyone against the walls. "Random inspection," they barked, but their eyes fixed on Malik's cell. They tore through everything. Mattresses were flipped, books scattered, personal items tossed aside. When they reached Malik's drawings, Officer Reynolds smiled coldly. Well, what do we have here?" "Those are approved art supplies," Jamal spoke up from his position against the wall. "He has permission." "Shut it," Reynolds snapped. He held up one of Malik's portraits. "Looks like unauthorized communication with outside parties to me. Could be gang-related." "They're just drawings," Malik said quietly. "Contraband," Reynolds declared. He gathered all of Malik's art supplies, pencils, paper, finished drawings, into a box. "And talking back to an officer? That's earned you some time in the hole." 2 guards grabbed Malik's arms. Jamal stepped forward. "This isn't right. He hasn't done anything wrong." Reynolds turned to him. "Want to join him?" "You can't just transfer this one," Reynolds ordered, jerking his thumb at Jamal. "Different block, now." They dragged Malik down the corridor toward solitary confinement. He caught a last glimpse of Jamal being led in the opposite direction, their eyes meeting briefly before he was pushed around a corner. The solitary cell was tiny, with no window and only a small slot in the door for food trays. The concrete walls seemed to close in immediately. Malik sat on the thin mattress, trying to control his breathing the way Jamal had taught him. Back at the White House, Langston stood in the parking area, keys in hand, the president's words echoing in his head. The elegant solution, the easy way out. He could almost taste the relief it would bring. His son free, his career intact, the system undisturbed. He got into his car and sat there, not starting the engine. The faces of others Royce had sentenced flashed through his mind. Young men like Malik, their lives discarded by a corrupt system. Elena's documents had revealed dozens of cases with similar patterns. How many more were there? That night, in his home office, Langston opened his laptop and began typing. "Dear Mr. President, I hereby tender my resignation as Attorney General of the United States." He finished the letter, read it over twice, but his finger hovered over the send button. Not yet. There was more work to be done first. The solitary confinement cell measured 8 feet by 6 feet, though to Malik, it felt smaller with each passing hour. Without windows or consistent light, time became fluid, marked only by the irregular arrival of bland meals through the small slot in the heavy metal door. The fluorescent bulb above buzzed incessantly, its harsh glow making the gray concrete walls seem to pulse. Malik sat cross-legged on the thin mattress, his back against the cold wall. His fingers traced the rough surface, finding a small piece of his broken pencil lead he'd managed to keep when the guards took his supplies. The graphite left faint marks on his fingertips, reminding him of long afternoons spent sketching in the school art room, of the way charcoal would smudge across his palm as he worked. The silence in solitary wasn't really silence at all. It was filled with small sounds that grew louder in isolation. The hum of the light, the distant clang of doors, the shuffle of guards' boots in the corridor, and his own breathing, which sometimes seemed too loud in his ears. He closed his eyes, trying to remember the techniques his art teacher had taught him about perspective and proportion. Slowly, carefully, he began to draw on the wall beside his bed. The graphite was barely visible against the gray concrete, but he could feel the lines taking shape under his fingers. First, an eye, wide and watchful, then another, then the curve of a nose, the set of a jaw. The face emerging was one he'd seen in the yard last week, an older man named Marcus who told him about the daughter who still visited every month, even after 15 years. A sound drifted through the vent near the floor, someone humming. The melody was familiar, a gospel song his mother used to sing in church. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. The voice was deep, resonant even through the metal ductwork. Another voice joined in from somewhere else in the block, then another, creating a quiet harmony that seemed to seep through the walls themselves. Malik's hand stilled on the wall as he listened. The hymn continued, soft but clear, a thread of humanity weaving through the sterile prison air. He recognized one of the voices, Brother Thomas, who led informal prayer circles in the yard. The others he couldn't place, but it didn't matter. The song connected them all, reaching across the isolation. In Washington, D.C., Langston Pryor's office was quiet except for the sound of paper shuffling as his team worked through another late night. Sarah Chen looked up from her computer as a courier arrived with a large manila envelope marked Urgent. "It's from the Art for Change initiative," she said, reading the return address. Inside were dozens of high-quality scans, portraits done in simple pencil strokes but carrying extraordinary emotional depth. Each face told a story. A middle-aged man with laugh lines around his eyes and a quote from Langston Hughes beneath the drawing. A teenage boy who looked no older than Malik, his expression both defiant and vulnerable. An elderly man whose weathered features spoke of decades behind bars. Langston moved closer, picking up one of the scans. His son's artistic talent had always been evident, but these portraits showed something more, an ability to see past the prison uniforms and ID numbers to the humanity beneath. Each drawing was accompanied by small notes, names, fragments of stories, favorite songs, children's birthdays. These were uploaded before the prison confiscated his supplies, Sarah explained, pulling up the nonprofit's cloud storage. The volunteer coordinator saw their value and made sure they were preserved. Langston spread the portraits across his desk, studying each face. These weren't just inmates. They were fathers, sons, brothers. Some had been sentenced by Judge Royce, others by judges like him. All of them had stories that needed telling. "Create a digital portfolio," he instructed his team. "Title it Inside Voices. Include every detail Malik recorded with the portraits. I want these faces seen." The team worked through the night, scanning, organizing, and creating a powerful presentation that combined the artwork with carefully selected case details. By morning, they had compiled a compelling narrative of systemic injustice told through Malik's art. Langston reviewed his contact list, civil rights attorneys he'd worked with over the years, journalists who'd covered his cases, activists who'd both supported and challenged him. He thought of the president's warning about taking down the system. These portraits weren't just about Malik anymore. They were about every face on every page. "Send it to everyone," he told Sarah. "Every contact on that list." The portfolio went out in waves of emails, each one carrying Malik's vision of humanity behind bars. Within hours, responses began trickling in. A civil rights lawyer in Atlanta requested permission to use the images in an upcoming class action suit. A documentary filmmaker asked about interview rights. A national news magazine editor wanted to run a feature. Back in solitary, Malik lay on his mattress, the wall beside him now covered in nearly invisible drawings. He'd filled the concrete canvas with faces from memory. Jamal's quiet strength, Brother Thomas's gentle wisdom, Marcus's weathered dignity. The gospel songs had faded hours ago, leaving behind a different kind of quiet. Footsteps approached in the corridor, guards doing their rounds. They paused outside his cell, their voices carrying through the thick door. "Did you see the news about that kid's drawings?" one guard asked. "What kid?" "The artist, Henderson. People outside are starting to make noise about him." Malik's heart jumped. He rolled onto his side, pressing his ear to the vent near the floor. The guards' voices grew fainter as they moved down the hall, but those few words hung in the air like smoke. People outside, making noise. He touched the wall where he'd drawn Jamal's face, the graphite smudging under his fingers. In the absolute darkness of solitary, where hours bled into days and hope seemed like a distant memory, something flickered. Small, fragile, but present, like the first star appearing in an evening sky. Malik closed his eyes, remembering the feeling of pencil on paper, of creating something that couldn't be erased or locked away. Somewhere beyond these walls, his drawings were speaking for him, telling stories that needed to be told. He lay still, listening to the familiar sounds of the prison night, holding that tiny spark of hope close to his heart. The morning headlines flickered across screens nationwide, each one more pointed than the last. "Teen artist behind bars. Justice system under scrutiny," read one. "Evidence tampering in high-profile youth conviction," declared another. The stories were careful, measured, but the implications were clear. Something was very wrong in the American justice system. In the Department of Justice's main conference room, deputy directors shifted uncomfortably in their chairs as they reviewed the morning's news summaries. The evidence leaked to the press was damning. Doctored traffic camera footage, manipulated witness statements, a judge's financial ties to private prisons. No names had been released yet, but the pressure was building. "We need to get ahead of this," insisted Deputy Director Harrison, his tie slightly askew as he paced the room. "The public's going to demand answers." "We don't even know the source of these leaks," another official pointed out, nervously clicking his pen. "How can we respond to allegations we can't verify?" Down the hall, Langston Pryor sat in his office, watching the story unfold on multiple screens. His team had done their work well, releasing just enough information to spark interest without revealing their hand. The evidence of corruption in Malik's case was just the beginning. Elena Vasquez huddled over her laptop in a small room of the safe house, her coffee growing cold beside her. She'd been monitoring news sites for hours, watching as the story she helped uncover began to take shape in the public consciousness. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through article after article. No one had mentioned her name or role, but she knew it was only a matter of time before people started asking questions. Her phone buzzed, a secure messaging app installed by Langston's team. The message was brief but clear. "Need more. Pattern required for subpoena. Ars history key." Elena's heart raced. She knew what they were asking. Judge Royce's corruption couldn't be proven with just one case. They needed to show a pattern of behavior, a systemic abuse of power that couldn't be explained away as a single mistake. In his office, Langston gathered his most trusted analysts. "Every case Royce has touched in the past decade," he instructed, his voice low and steady. "Every ruling, every sentence, every sealed document. Leave no stone unturned." The team worked in shifts, combing through digital archives, court records, and case files. They created spreadsheets tracking sentencing patterns, demographic data, and appeal rates. Young lawyers fresh from top schools sat side by side with veteran paralegals, all focused on uncovering the truth. Sarah Chen, one of Langston's key analysts, was the first to notice the pattern in the sealed complaints. 23, she announced, spreading the documents across the conference table. All buried under procedural technicalities, all involving allegations of judicial misconduct. Another analyst, Marcus Rodriguez, identified the sentencing patterns. 11 cases with nearly identical circumstances, he reported. Different defendants, different crimes, but the same unusual sentencing structure. It's like he was following a template. But it was the racial data that told the most damning story. Case after case showed black youth receiving maximum sentences for minor offenses, while similar cases with white defendants resulted in probation or reduced charges. The numbers were stark, undeniable. Elena received regular updates through secure channels, her heart growing heavier with each new revelation. She remembered the faces that had passed through Royce's courtroom. Young men, like Malik, their futures sealed with the bang of a gavel. She thought of her own family, of the fear they lived with daily, and knew she couldn't stop now. Langston sat alone in his office late one evening, staring at the resignation letter he'd drafted days ago. The cursor blinked on his screen, waiting for him to make a decision. The evidence against Royce was overwhelming now, a clear pattern of corruption that stretched back years. The letter suddenly seemed like an escape route he no longer needed. With a quick movement, he selected the entire document and pressed delete. The screen cleared, like a weight lifting from his shoulders. He stood, straightened his tie, and gathered the files his team had prepared. The DOJ press room was quiet when he entered, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. He placed a thick folder on the podium, its label clear and unambiguous. Judiciary Integrity Investigation, Royce. The room was empty now, but soon it would be filled with reporters, cameras, and questions. Langston didn't need to speak yet. The folder said everything necessary. Years of hidden corruption, of lives destroyed by prejudice masked as justice, would finally come to light. He thought of Malik, alone in his cell, and knew that silence was no longer an option. He arranged the materials carefully on the podium, each document telling part of the larger story: the statistical analyses, the pattern of sealed complaints, the evidence of systemic racism in sentencing. Tomorrow, this room would become the center of a storm that would shake the justice system to its core. Langston stepped back, looking at the folder one last time. He had spent his career working within the system, believing he could change it from the inside. Now, he was preparing to expose its deepest flaws, to challenge the very institutions he'd sworn to protect. But as he thought of his son's face, of Elena's courage, of all the lives affected by Royce's corruption, he knew there was no other choice. The time for hiding was over. The truth would finally have its day in court. Later, the Senate Judiciary Committee chamber hummed with tense energy as Langston Pryor took his seat at the witness table. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, casting long shadows across the ornate room. The mahogany panels and brass fixtures seemed to absorb the weight of what was about to unfold. Committee members shuffled papers and whispered among themselves. Senator Diana Martinez, known for her progressive stance on judicial reform, adjusted her microphone. Across the aisle, Senator William Bradford, a longtime defender of the current system, frowned at the thick folder before him. "Mr. Pryor," Committee Chairman Reynolds began, his voice carrying through the chamber, "you've submitted serious allegations against a sitting federal judge. The committee takes such matters with utmost gravity. Please proceed with your opening statement." Langston straightened in his chair, his expression composed but determined. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I present today isn't just about one case or one judge. It's about a pattern of systematic abuse of power that has destroyed countless lives." He opened the first folder, laying out documents in a precise order. Over the past decade, Judge Barrett Royce has accumulated 23 sealed complaints of judicial misconduct. Each was buried through procedural technicalities. Senator Bradford interrupted, his voice sharp. "Sealed complaints are sealed for a reason, Mr. Pryor. How did you obtain these?" "Through legal channels, Senator. Court clerks are obligated to report evidence of judicial misconduct. These files were properly accessed as part of a Department of Justice integrity investigation. Langston moved to his next exhibit, a detailed analysis of the forensic lab reports. This lab, contracted exclusively by Judge Royce's court, shows a pattern of manipulated evidence. In 11 cases, including that of Malik Henderson, key forensic findings were altered after initial submission. The room stirred at the mention of Malik's name. Outside, the first whispers of the testimony began reaching journalists gathered on the steps. Social media lit up with speculation. Senator Martinez leaned forward. "Can you elaborate on the nature of these alterations?" Langston displayed side-by-side comparisons on the chamber's screens. Original reports showing inconclusive evidence were changed to indicate positive matches. Probability statistics were adjusted. In the Henderson case, surveillance footage was doctored using deepfake technology. He played the original and manipulated traffic camera footage. The differences were subtle but unmistakable. Our cyber forensics team identified artificial modifications designed to place the accused at the scene of the crime when he was actually miles away. Senator Bradford's face reddened. "This is circumstantial at best. You're asking us to believe a respected federal judge orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy?" "I'm asking you to follow the money, Senator." Langston revealed his next exhibit, a complex flowchart showing financial connections. Judge Royce's family trust holds significant investments in private prison corporations. His nephew sits on the board of Central Correctional Holdings, where many of his harshest sentences are served. Outside the chamber, word spread quickly. Protesters began gathering, their chants echoing through the Capitol halls. "No more silence, no more lies." Social media exploded with hashtags, #Free Malik, #Corrupt Courts, #Justice Reform. Inside, the questioning grew more intense. Senator Martinez studied the sentencing data. These statistics show a clear racial disparity. Black youth receiving maximum sentences at 8 times the rate of white defendants for similar offenses. "Correct," Langston confirmed. Judge Royce's sentencing pattern reveals a consistent bias, particularly against young black males. This bias, combined with his financial interests in private prisons, creates a clear conflict of interest. The chamber doors opened briefly as an aide rushed in, passing notes to several senators. The news was breaking across major networks. Malik Henderson's story was now public, his artwork from prison being shared across social media platforms. Senator Bradford attempted one last challenge. "Mr. Pryor, your own position as Attorney General could be seen as compromised. Why bring these allegations forward now?" Langston met his gaze steadily. "Because silence perpetuates injustice, Senator. Every day we remain quiet, more lives are destroyed by corrupt practices hiding behind judicial robes." The hearing continued for hours, each piece of evidence examined in detail. Langston remained composed, methodically presenting document after document, testimony after testimony. Elena Vasquez's evidence was introduced anonymously, protected under whistleblower statutes. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the chamber windows, Chairman Reynolds called the hearing to a close. "This committee will review all submitted evidence and reconvene for further discussion. Mr. Pryor, you are dismissed." Langston gathered his materials slowly, aware of the weight of what had just transpired. The hallway outside buzzed with activity. Journalists, staffers, and observers all trying to process the day's revelations. As he stepped out of the chamber, cameras flashed and microphones thrust forward. The crowd pressed closer, questions overlapping. "Mr. Pryor, what happens next? Will Judge Royce face criminal charges? How many cases could be affected?" Then one voice cut through the chaos. "Is the boy really your son?" Langston stopped. The hallway fell silent. He turned to face the wall of cameras, his expression resolute. "Yes," he said clearly. "And this isn't just about him. It's about every name buried in silence." The fluorescent lights in the prison corridor flickered as 2 guards marched Malik from his solitary cell. Their grip on his arms was unnecessarily tight, fingers digging into his skin through the thin prison uniform. The night shift had just started and the block was eerily quiet except for their echoing footsteps. "Special delivery," one guard sneered, shoving Malik forward. They led him down an unfamiliar hallway past the laundry room and maintenance closets to a section where the security cameras didn't reach. Malik's heart pounded against his ribs as they stopped at a heavy metal door. The guard unlocked it, revealing a dark storage room filled with old filing cabinets and broken furniture. Before Malik could process what was happening, rough hands pushed him inside. He stumbled, catching himself against a metal shelf. The door slammed shut behind him. In the darkness, he could make out the shapes of 3 guards. A portable radio crackled to life in the corner, heavy metal music blasting at full volume. "Think you're some kind of celebrity now, artist boy?" The tallest guard stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "Getting daddy to make trouble for everyone?" The first blow caught Malik in the stomach, driving the air from his lungs. He doubled over, gasping, only to receive a sharp uppercut to his jaw. The third guard circled behind him, landing a brutal kidney punch that sent Malik to his knees. "You're not special," one of them whispered, his voice barely audible over the blaring music. The words were punctuated by kicks to Malik's ribs. "Just another number in here." Malik tried to protect his head, curling into himself as the assault continued. The music grew louder, drowning out any sounds of the beating. Through the haze of pain, he thought of his sketches, the faces he'd drawn, the stories he'd tried to tell. Each impact seemed determined to erase those moments of humanity he'd captured. The beating lasted several minutes, though to Malik it felt like hours. When they finally stopped, one guard grabbed his hair, forcing him to look up. "Next time it'll be worse. Tell daddy to back off." They left him there, crumpled on the cold concrete floor. The radio continued playing for a few more minutes, masking any sounds of their departure. When silence finally fell, Malik tasted blood in his mouth and felt the sharp stab of what he suspected were broken ribs. It took 3 other inmates to help get Malik to the infirmary. His face was swollen, his body covered in bruises, and he could barely walk. The prison doctor, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, documented his injuries with clinical detachment. 3 fractured ribs, she muttered, marking her chart. Possible concussion, multiple contusions. In another part of the prison, Jamal received word of the assault through the complex network of inmate communication. He sat in his new cell, prayer beads moving through his fingers as he considered his options. When the weekly church volunteer arrived for evening services, Jamal knew what he had to do. "Sister Grace," he said quietly after the service, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Henderson boy, the artist, they hurt him bad tonight. Can you make sure his father knows?" The elderly volunteer, who had been visiting the prison for over 2 decades, understood the gravity of the request. She nodded once, her lined face solemn. Within hours, the message reached Langston through secure channels. Langston was in his office when the news arrived. He read the brief message twice, his hands shaking with barely contained rage. Without hesitation, he picked up his phone and began making calls. By midnight, he had initiated emergency federal oversight proceedings for the facility, citing credible allegations of prisoner abuse and retaliation. Meanwhile, Elena Vasquez sat in a safe house provided by the Department of Justice, staring at the subpoena in her hands. Her brother had been safely relocated to another state, but the fear remained, a constant companion since she'd first copied those files. The phone rang, making her jump. It was Langston. "Ms. Vasquez." His voice was steady, reassuring. "I know you're scared, but you have full whistleblower protection. We've arranged for remote testimony. You won't have to appear in person." Elena took a deep breath, thinking of Malik's face during the trial, of Judge Royce's smug certainty that no one would challenge him. "Will it be enough?" she asked. "To help Malik?" "The truth always matters," Langston replied. "Your testimony could break this whole thing open." The next morning, Elena sat in a darkened room, facing a video setup that would broadcast her testimony while keeping her identity concealed. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, but her voice was clear and steady when she began to speak. "My name is Witness A. she started, using her designated anonymous identifier. "I served as a court clerk in Judge Barrett Royce's courtroom for 3 years." The senators on the video screen leaned forward as Elena methodically detailed the pattern of judicial misconduct she had witnessed. She explained the missing files, the altered evidence logs, the rushed proceedings that violated due process. "In the case of Malik Henderson," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "Judge Royce deliberately suppressed exculpatory evidence. He sealed documents that would have proven the defendant's innocence without proper procedure or justification." Senator Martinez's voice came through the speaker. "Can you be more specific about these documents?" "There was surveillance footage from a library showing Malik Henderson at the time of the robbery. There were witness statements that contradicted the prosecution's timeline. All of these were marked as sealed and removed from the defense's access." "And you're certain Judge Royce was aware of this evidence?" Senator Bradford's skeptical tone cut through the feed. Elena's response was unwavering. "Yes, Senator. I personally witnessed Judge Royce review these documents in his chambers. He knew Malik was innocent. He chose to proceed with the trial anyway." The chamber fell silent at this direct accusation. Elena continued, describing the irregular speed of the proceedings, the unusual patterns in sentencing, and the systematic way evidence was manipulated or hidden. Through the secure video feed, she could see the impact her words were having. Senators exchanged glances. Aides scribbled furious notes. The truth she had carried for so long was finally being heard. The Senate Judiciary Committee chamber buzzed with tension as the final votes were tallied. Senators shifted in their seats, their faces grave as they considered the weight of their decision. The evidence before them was overwhelming. Elena's detailed testimony, Langston's meticulously compiled report, and the disturbing pattern of judicial misconduct that could no longer be ignored. The committee votes 16-5 in favor of opening a formal investigation into Judge Barrett Royce, Chairman Senator Mitchell announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. The gavel's sharp crack seemed to release a wave of held breath. Within hours, news alerts lit up phones across the country. Major networks interrupted regular programming. Headlines screamed across social media. "Federal judge under investigation. Pattern of racial bias exposed. Teen artist's case breaks open judicial scandal." Langston watched from his office as the story exploded. Every major outlet wanted comments, interviews, exclusive details. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since the vote was announced. But his attention was fixed on a different screen, the one showing the growing crowds gathering outside courthouses across the country. In cities nationwide, protesters assembled with signs bearing Malik's name and face. Artists and activists had transformed his prison portraits into powerful symbols of resistance. As night fell in Chicago, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles, massive projectors illuminated courthouse facades with enlarged versions of Malik's drawings. The faces he had captured, each one telling its own story of justice denied, looked down upon the crowds below. "These are not just drawings," one activist leader told reporters in Detroit. "These are testimonies. Each face represents hundreds more still trapped in silence." Former defendants from Judge Royce's courtroom began coming forward. Their stories followed a disturbing pattern: rushed trials, missing evidence, harsh sentences that didn't match the crimes. Many were young black men who had faced Royce as teenagers, now serving decades for minor offenses. Langston's team worked through the night to launch a dedicated website. The complete Inside Voices collection went live at midnight. Dozens of Malik's portraits, each accompanied by the subject's story. Langston's foreword was simple but powerful. "These are not inmates, these are people. Sons, daughters, fathers, mothers, artists, dreamers, humans who deserve to be seen. My son saw their humanity when the system refused to see his. Look at these faces. Really look. This is what justice forgotten looks like." The site crashed within hours from overwhelming traffic, but by morning the portraits had been shared millions of times across social media platforms. Celebrity activists amplified the message. Civil rights organizations demanded accountability. Judge Royce's office initially maintained silence, but as pressure mounted, His team arranged a televised statement. He appeared on the courthouse steps, his usual commanding presence somewhat diminished by the circumstances. Camera lights reflected off his silver hair as he gripped the podium. "These allegations are completely unfounded," he declared, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone he'd used from the bench for decades. "My record speaks for itself. I have served this community with distinction, upholding the law without prejudice or favor. This witch hunt, orchestrated by a politically motivated few, cannot erase 30 years of dedicated service." But even as Royce spoke, more damaging evidence emerged. Someone within the Department of Justice leaked internal memos analyzing conviction rates across multiple jurisdictions. The numbers were damning. Under Royce's tenure, black youth faced conviction rates exceeding 95%, with most receiving maximum sentences. In contrast, white defendants in similar cases typically received probation or deferred prosecution. Statistical analyses showed impossible disparities. Cases involving black defendants were processed an average of 40% faster than those with white defendants. Evidence suppression occurred in 63% of cases with minority defendants compared to 12% for white defendants. One particular memo, dated 3 years earlier, had flagged these patterns but was apparently buried by senior officials. The document included a warning. Statistical anomalies suggest systematic bias in judicial process. Recommend immediate review. No review had ever been conducted. The leaked memos sent shockwaves through the legal community. Bar associations issued statements of concern. Law school professors used the data in their classes as case studies in systemic racism. Civil rights attorneys began preparing class action lawsuits on behalf of potentially thousands of affected defendants. Pressure mounted on the Judicial Oversight Committee to take immediate action. They couldn't ignore the growing evidence or the public outcry. Late on a Friday afternoon, the chief judge of the circuit issued a brief statement. In light of serious allegations and pending investigation, Judge Barrett Royce has been placed on administrative leave effective immediately. All cases currently under his jurisdiction will be reassigned. Hours later, the Department of Corrections released its own announcement. A special review board would be convened to examine cases where evidence of judicial misconduct might have affected outcomes. Malik's case was designated as the first for review. The Federal Appeals Court Chief Judge personally selected Judge Diana Martinez, known for her strict adherence to procedure and unimpeachable record on civil rights, to oversee Malik's appeal. Her appointment sent a clear message. This review would be thorough and impartial. The machinery of justice, so long grinding forward without question, had finally been forced to stop and reverse course. The system that had swallowed Malik and countless others was now under the microscope, its flaws exposed to public scrutiny. The federal courthouse stood as a stark contrast to the county building where Malik had first been sentenced. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating polished wooden benches and marble columns. The air felt different here. Cleaner, calmer, carrying the weight of true justice rather than rushed verdicts. At precisely 9 in the morning, 2 U.S. Marshals escorted Malik through the heavy oak doors. The chains around his ankles clinked softly against the floor, a sound that seemed to echo through the hushed chamber. He looked thinner than before, his prison uniform hanging loose on his frame, but his eyes remained clear and focused. The past 3 weeks had transformed him. The bruises from the guards' beating had faded to yellow shadows, but they'd left something harder beneath the surface. Not bitterness, something more like quiet determination. He'd spent his final days in custody sketching on borrowed paper, documenting everything he saw. Each drawing was a testimony, each face a story that needed telling. As Malik was led to the defense table, his gaze swept across the courtroom. The gallery was half full, mostly with reporters and legal observers. But in the front row, a familiar figure stood out. Langston Pryor, wearing a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the morning light. For the first time in 11 years, father and son were in the same room. Their eyes met. Malik's step faltered slightly. Langston's hands, clasped in front of him, tightened until his knuckles showed white. Neither spoke, but something electric passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or the weight of all the words they'd never said. The bailiff called the court to order as Judge Martinez entered. Her reputation for fairness had preceded her. She'd spent 20 years as a public defender before joining the federal bench. She carried herself with quiet authority, her silver-streaked hair pulled back severely, her dark eyes missing nothing. Malik's new legal team, assembled by civil rights organizations and led by renowned attorney Sarah Chen, laid out their case methodically. They projected the falsified traffic camera footage onto a large screen, highlighting the telltale signs of manipulation. Technical experts testified about shadow inconsistencies and digital artifacts that proved tampering. Elena's recorded testimony played next. Her voice, though electronically altered, rang with clarity as she detailed Judge Royce's systematic suppression of evidence. She described watching him remove key documents from case files, rushing through procedural safeguards and maintaining a separate set of notes that never made it into official records. The forensics presentation was particularly damning. Dr. Marcus Webb, a leading expert in criminal forensics, demonstrated how the lab reports in Malik's case had been deliberately misinterpreted. The partial glove print that supposedly linked Malik to the robbery scene actually excluded him based on size and pattern analysis. Throughout the morning, Langston remained still, his face a mask of professional composure. But those who knew him well might have noticed his jaw clenching whenever particularly egregious examples of misconduct were presented. His presence in the courtroom spoke volumes, the nation's top law enforcement officer essentially testifying against the system he represented. The statistical analysis of Judge Royce's sentencing patterns drew audible reactions from the gallery. Charts and graphs displayed on screens showed the stark racial disparities. Black juveniles receiving sentences averaging 300% longer than white defendants for identical crimes. Malik's case, while extreme, fit perfectly into the pattern. During the lunch recess, Malik sat alone in a holding cell, picking at a sandwich he couldn't taste. Through the small window in the door, he could see court officers walking past, their shoes clicking on the tile floor. One stopped to peer in at him, not with the usual guard suspicion, but with something like curiosity or even respect. When court resumed, Judge Martinez addressed Malik directly. "Mr. Henderson, would you like to make a statement before we proceed?" Malik stood slowly, the chains at his feet shifting. The room fell completely silent. He looked young in his oversized uniform, but his voice was steady and clear. "I didn't ask for this," he said simply. "I didn't want to be the person who exposed anything. I just wanted to make art and go to college." He paused, glancing briefly at Langston before continuing. "But I'm not angry. I've met too many others inside who never got this chance. I just want my life back." Judge Martinez listened intently, her expression thoughtful. When Malik finished speaking, she remained silent for several long moments, reviewing the papers before her. The tension in the room grew with each passing second. Finally, she looked up. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, including clear proof of judicial misconduct, evidence tampering, and violation of the defendant's constitutional rights, I hereby overturn the conviction of Malik Henderson. She paused, letting the words settle. Furthermore, I order his immediate release. Mr. Henderson, you are free to go. The gallery erupted in muffled exclamations. Reporters rushed from the room to file their stories. Malik's lawyers hugged each other, tears in their eyes. But Malik himself stood perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter this moment like a dream. In the back of the courtroom, Renee Henderson pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming silently down her face. She had lived this nightmare for months, watching her son disappear into a system designed to swallow him whole. Now finally she could breathe again. Langston rose from his seat slowly, deliberately. He walked to where Renee sat, each step measured and careful, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt. Without a word, he lowered himself into the seat beside her. They didn't look at each other. They didn't touch, but their breathing fell into sync, matching rhythm for the first time since they'd shared a life together, all those years ago. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Malik Henderson emerged into freedom. He squinted against the light, his body tense and uncertain in the plain white shirt that had replaced his prison uniform. The marks on his wrists where the handcuffs had been were still visible. red rings that would fade but never quite disappear from his memory. The street buzzed with energy. Reporters crowded behind metal barriers, their cameras flashing like lightning. Protesters held signs bearing his portrait, drawings he'd made inside, now symbols of something larger than himself. Supporters chanted his name, their voices rising and falling like waves against the courthouse walls. But Malik didn't speak. He didn't wave or acknowledge the crowds. His eyes searched the chaos until they found what he was looking for. His mother, Renee, standing quietly beside the courthouse exit. She wore the same blue dress she'd had on the day he was arrested, as if trying to bridge the gap between then and now. Renee's arms trembled as she watched her son descend the steps. She'd imagined this moment countless times during sleepless nights, but reality felt different, more fragile somehow. The space between them seemed to stretch and contract with each step he took. When Malik reached her, neither of them moved at first. They stood facing each other, relearning the shapes of their faces, noting the changes time and trauma had carved into their features. Then, without a word, Renee opened her arms. Malik stepped into them and they held each other as if trying to compress months of separation into a single embrace. Behind them, Langston Pryor emerged from the courthouse. He moved with uncharacteristic hesitation, his usual confident stride replaced by careful, measured steps. His eyes never left his son, but he kept his distance, aware that his presence here was complicated, both necessary and intrusive. After a moment, he approached them cautiously. The reporters' cameras swiveled to capture this moment, the nation's attorney general approaching the son he'd helped free. But Langston ignored them, focused entirely on Malik's face, searching for permission to speak. Malik lifted his head from his mother's shoulder. He met his father's gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement. Then he turned away, keeping one arm around Renee as they walked toward the waiting car. The drive home was quiet. Renee had cleaned Malik's room obsessively during his absence, but hadn't changed anything. His old posters still hung on the walls, his art supplies still arranged on his desk, a time capsule of the life that had been interrupted. As evening settled over the city, the three of them found themselves in Renee's small dining room. Chinese takeout containers covered the table, Malik's favorite order from the place down the street. The smell of kung pao chicken and vegetable lo mein filled the air, familiar and strange at the same time. They ate without speaking much. Malik used chopsticks with careful precision, as if relearning how to handle anything more sophisticated than prison flatware. Renee kept glancing at him, then looking away when he noticed. Langston focused on his food, stealing glimpses of both of them when he thought they weren't watching. The silence wasn't entirely uncomfortable. It held the weight of 12 years of separation, of choices made and consequences borne. But it also held possibility, the chance to build something new from the ruins of what had been broken. "The rice is good," Langston said at one point, his voice soft and uncertain. "It's from Golden Palace," Renee replied. "They haven't changed their recipe." "Remember when you used to order extra fortune cookies?" Malik asked suddenly, looking at his mother. "You'd save them for breakfast." A small smile crossed Renee's face. "I still do sometimes." These fragments of conversation drifted between them like leaves on water, small, safe topics that allowed them to test the waters of their new reality. Nobody mentioned the trial, or the prison, or the years of absence. Those conversations would come later. For now, they simply shared space and food, their eyes heavy with exhaustion and unspoken words. Miles away, in a safe house provided by witness protection, Elena Vasquez sat cross-legged on a borrowed bed, her laptop open before her. She watched the live stream of Malik's release, her heart pounding as she saw him step into the sunlight. Her own role in his freedom felt both massive and minimal, a single thread in a larger tapestry of justice and redemption. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line read, "Position Offer, National Civil Rights Legal Defense Fund." The message outlined a new role, Director of Whistleblower Protection and Transparency Reform. They wanted her to lead a nationwide effort to protect others who might step forward, to create pathways for truth to emerge from broken systems. Elena's hands shook slightly as she read the offer. 6 months ago, she had been a court clerk, head down, trying to survive. Now she had the chance to help change the very system that had forced her into hiding. She looked at Malik's face on the screen, at the quiet dignity in his expression, and felt something settle in her chest, a certainty that she had chosen the right path. As night fell, Malik finally entered his bedroom. The space felt different now, too small, too young, too innocent. His old bed creaked under his weight as he sat down, the familiar sound almost startling after months of hard prison bunks. The glow-in-the-dark stars he'd stuck to his ceiling in middle school still hung there, their phosphorescent light dim but persistent. He reached for his desk where his mother had laid out fresh art supplies, new sketchbooks, pencils, charcoal. But instead of drawing, he took a single blank sheet of paper and pinned it to the wall above his bed. The white surface caught the moonlight from his window, glowing like a promise. Malik lay back, staring at that empty page. It represented everything: a clean slate, a new beginning, a story yet to be told. His eyelids grew heavy as exhaustion finally overtook him. For the first time in months, he drifted off to sleep without the sound of gates clanging shut, without guards' footsteps echoing down corridors, without bars casting shadows across his dreams. The DC Art Gallery buzzed quietly as visitors moved through the space. Malik Henderson sat on a wooden bench watching people absorb his exhibit, Inside Voices, portraits drawn during his imprisonment that lined the walls, each capturing the humanity beneath prison uniforms. Each sketch was mounted with a placard showing a name, prison number, and quote, "Marcus Williams, number 247891. My daughter learned to walk while I was in here." David Chen, number 156732. I still remember the sound of my mother's piano. Robert Jones, number 398156. Sometimes I dream I'm flying over my old neighborhood. Visitors moved slowly, reactions ranging from tears to silence. Some lingered before single portraits. Others touched placards repeatedly. The air felt heavy with untold stories. Malik watched in simple clothes, preferring anonymity as people encountered these narratives without his influence. The door opened, admitting Langston Pryor in casual clothes, a stark contrast to his attorney general persona. He moved contemplatively through the gallery, pausing longest at Jamal's portrait, which showed a gentle smile beneath the words, "Every sunrise is Allah's reminder that darkness doesn't last forever." Malik approached. They walked together silently, their footsteps finding shared rhythm. "What do I call you now?" Langston finally asked. "Dad's fine for now," Malik answered. "Not warm, not cold, just possible." Later, Elena Vasquez spoke from a podium about institutional accountability, while her brother recorded proudly from the front row, his immigration status now secure. As evening fell, Malik stood outside with his sketch pad. A young boy approached. "You really drew all those?" Malik knelt to eye level. Not all, just the ones no one else would. He tore out a clean page and offered it to the boy. "Start here," he said. If you enjoyed the story of Malik, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.